I married David on a golden September afternoon, the kind that paints everything in honey and makes you believe in forever. But I swear to you, I knew something was wrong the moment I saw his son. The ceremony was small, intimate, draped in fall leaves and violin music, a picturesque lie in slow motion. And when I walked down that aisle in ivory lace, my heart wasn't pounding for love. It was pounding because I locked eyes with a stranger. His name was Ryan, 22, David's only son from his first marriage, and though I'd seen photos, nothing prepared me for the storm in that boy's eyes. He didn't smile, he didn't blink, he just stared, and when I smiled politely at him before exchanging vows with his father, he tilted his head as if trying to figure out why I was there. The photographer caught us in that moment, my veil fluttering, his eyes drilling through me, and I swear to God, it looked like we were already in the middle of something secret. David noticed none of it. He held my hand too tightly at the altar, trembling with excitement, oblivious to the unspoken war beginning between two people in his life who were never supposed to cross emotional wires. I told myself it was nerves, that Ryan's stare was just his way of protecting his father from another failed marriage. But at the reception, when our fingers brushed as he passed me a champagne flute, and neither of us moved away, I knew I was lying to myself. He said 3 words to me that night: "You look lost," and walked away, leaving me staring at his back like it had answers. David was almost 50, older than I'd imagined I'd marry, but his quiet confidence had wrapped around me like a safe blanket during my loneliest years. I met him after a failed engagement and a miscarriage no one but my mother knew about, and when he walked into my bookstore with a gentle smile and a request for first editions, I thought he was a kind of salvation. Our love grew quietly, steadily, not the kind that burns but the kind that warms, and I was ready to settle into that peace. But Ryan was everything David wasn't. Sharp edges, restless eyes, a fire that didn't ask for permission before it scorched. He lived in Chicago, studied architecture, and had only flown in for the wedding, but from the moment I met him, I felt watched, not in a creepy way, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that made me feel like I was a painting he couldn't decide whether to destroy or steal. After the honeymoon, things should have settled, but they didn't. David worked long hours again, just like before, and our home returned to that eerie silence I remembered from our dating days, the kind where two people loved each other, but didn't talk past dinner. Ryan started texting me after the wedding, nothing inappropriate at first, book recommendations, updates about classes, random thoughts about his dad's quirks, but always with an undertone, like he was tugging at a string between us just to see if I'd pull back. I didn't. I told myself I was being friendly. I told myself it was motherly, but the truth, I liked the way he saw me. David saw me as someone to protect, someone to place on a shelf like one of his rare novels. Ryan saw me as a person flawed, curious, complicated. One night, David went on a business trip, and Ryan called. He said he had a layover nearby and wanted to get coffee before heading to his final destination. I agreed, my stomach doing backflips. I pretended not to notice. That coffee turned into a 4-hour conversation. We talked about death, love, betrayal, regrets. He asked me if I ever felt like I was living someone else's life. I lied and said no. He asked me if I loved his father. I said, of course. He nodded, then looked out the window and whispered, that's not what I asked. I went home shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep next to David. I pretended I had a stomachache and lay on the guest room bed staring at the ceiling like it had answers. The next morning, Ryan texted one word, sorry. But he wasn't. The more David drifted, the more Ryan stepped in. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. He remembered things David forgot. He asked how my writing was going. He noticed when I changed my hair. He sent me music that felt like it had been written for all the sadness I never told anyone I carried. And I started waiting for his messages. Like a teenager again, like an idiot. One night, David and I went to a gala. I wore a red dress that hugged my hips and made me feel seen for the first time in months. David didn't notice, but Ryan did. He texted, you look unreal in that dress. And when I got home, tipsy and hollow, I realized I'd thought of Ryan the whole night. I deleted the message, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. David asked if I was okay. I said yes. He kissed my forehead and went to bed. I sat at the window for 2 hours, trying to figure out when my marriage stopped feeling like a promise and started feeling like a performance. I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong, that Ryan was just a crush, a forbidden daydream. But when he showed up 2 weeks later, saying he'd decided to take an internship in our city to spend more time with Dad, I knew I was in trouble. He moved into the guest house behind our home. I started seeing him in the mornings. In the evenings, he'd come in for coffee. I'd hear him in the shower. One morning, he walked past me shirtless, hair wet, coffee in hand, and said, "You sure you married the right man?" I didn't answer. I just stared. He smirked, walked away, and I swear, my hands were shaking for the rest of the day. I tried to confess to my best friend. She laughed and said, "You're just lonely. It'll pass." But it didn't. It got worse. The air between me and Ryan crackled every time we were alone. We didn't even need to speak. Just being in the same room felt like a confession. One rainy afternoon, he stood behind me as I cooked, his breath warm on my neck. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. My whole body responded like it was starved. I excused myself and locked myself in the bathroom, crying without knowing why. Maybe because I felt desired again. Maybe because I was afraid. Maybe because deep down I knew the dam would break. And it did, but not yet. The night it happened didn't start with fire. It started with silence, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes you mistake the quiet for safety. David was away again, some last-minute conference in Seattle, and the house had that eerie stillness I used to love but had come to dread. Ryan was supposed to be at a friend's birthday dinner across town, and I had told myself I'd use the time to catch up on reading, pour a glass of wine, and remind myself that I was still a good person. I made it halfway through the first chapter when I heard his voice through the kitchen window. He was back early, laughing, alone. My breath caught in my throat for no good reason. Maybe I thought I could outrun the tension. Maybe I thought one more evening pretending would protect what little was left of my conscience. I was wrong. He walked into the kitchen, damp from the rain, dark hair clinging to his forehead, the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled up like he'd just escaped a dream. I didn't even ask why he was home early. I just poured him a second glass of wine and slid it across the island like we'd done this before. Like it was normal. Like the weight of all those glances, and almost words, hadn't been building a dam between us for months. For a while we just talked. Nothing scandalous. Just books, architecture, his classes. He said he'd been thinking about moving back for good. I asked why. He said, "I'm not sure yet." And we both knew he was lying. The storm outside thickened, thunder rumbling in the distance like some god was watching with a warning in his mouth. The power flickered, and I lit a candle like I'd done 1,000 times before. But tonight it felt different. Softer. More dangerous. He watched me move, watched the way I reached for the match, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear, the way I avoided his eyes like they were fire. I asked him if he was okay. He said yes, but his voice cracked. Then he said something that broke me in half. "I feel like I don't exist to anyone but you." I should have walked away. I should have said something about boundaries, about how this was wrong, about how I was married to his father for God's sake. But I didn't. Instead I whispered, "You do exist. You exist too much." He looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. I looked at him like he was the only person who saw me as more than a wife. And then he stepped forward, just one step, but it closed the space between us like gravity pulling planets together. I could smell the rain on his clothes. I could see the pulse in his throat. My hand moved before my brain did. I reached for his arm, intending to push him back, maybe just to ground myself in the moment, but when I touched him he shivered. Not from the cold, from something else. Something neither of us could pretend away anymore. The first touch was innocent, skin on skin, a graze, a heartbeat. The second, not so much. He cupped my jaw with both hands, gently, reverently, like he was afraid I'd break if he moved too fast. I should have stopped it. I should have said no. I should have screamed, "This isn't love, it's madness." But I didn't, because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about marriage or morality, or anything that existed outside that kitchen. I was just a woman aching to be touched like she mattered. I leaned in. He kissed me, and everything I'd buried for years, every unmet need, every tear I cried alone, every second I felt invisible, exploded between us like the storm outside had cracked open our world. It wasn't a long kiss, but it was enough. Enough to ruin me, enough to make me want more. I pulled away first, breathing hard, shaking. He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Don't be." He reached for my hand again, but I stepped back. "Go," I whispered. "Please, just go." And to his credit he did. But he left the wine glass on the counter, and I spent the next 2 hours staring at it like it held the future in its curves. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in David's empty bed, tracing the memory of Ryan's lips on mine like they were a crime scene. The next morning, nothing made sense. My coffee tasted like ash. My reflection felt like a stranger. I almost confessed everything to David over the phone when he called to check in, but all I said was, "I miss you." And I did. In a way, I missed the version of us that used to laugh. I missed the version of me that didn't crave the impossible. But I also missed the way Ryan looked at me, like I wasn't just someone's wife, like I wasn't broken, like I was still capable of being wanted. We didn't speak for a few days. I avoided him in the hallway. I stopped answering his texts. I deleted our old messages like that could erase history. But guilt isn't water. It doesn't wash things away. It burrows. It carves. It infects. And the silence, that made everything louder. Then came the second night. David had returned by then, exhausted and grateful to be home. We made love, slowly, mechanically, like people fulfilling a contract. He didn't notice that I flinched. He didn't notice that I cried silently after. He just kissed my shoulder and whispered, "I'm so lucky to have you." I almost told him the truth right there, but instead I said, "I love you too." The next morning, Ryan was in the kitchen again, shirtless again, like fate was mocking me. I dropped a glass. He helped me clean it up. Our hands touched again, and this time he didn't let go. He whispered, "I haven't stopped thinking about you." I said, "You have to." He said, "I can't." And then he walked away, but not before brushing his fingers across my lower back in a way that lit my skin on fire. That day, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. One sentence: "This is going to end badly." I didn't know how right I was. I didn't know that by the time the truth came out, 3 lives would be shattered. I didn't know that one kiss could burn an entire marriage to the ground. But I knew something had already broken. And no matter how hard I tried, I wasn't sure I wanted to fix it. I thought I could manage it. I thought I could section off what happened in the kitchen like it was a locked drawer in my mind, never to be opened again. But you can't partition guilt. It bleeds. It seeps through your pores, through your tone, through the pauses between words. And David, sweet, structured, emotionally meticulous David, he started noticing. Not all at once, and not the way people in movies do, like catching lipstick on a collar, or finding a secret phone. No, he noticed in the quiet spaces. He noticed in the way I laughed too fast or not at all. He noticed in the dinners that sat untouched on my plate, in the way I flinched when he touched my wrist, in how I smiled without showing my teeth. But he never once looked at Ryan. Not even a flicker of suspicion pointed in his son's direction. Instead, he started asking me questions about my past, my old job, my old apartment, my old college boyfriend, like the ghosts in my closet had risen and whispered rumors into his ears, and he couldn't tell which ones were real. And to make matters worse, Ryan and I kept circling each other like stars caught in a gravitational dance we didn't ask for but couldn't escape. He didn't touch me again. Not yet. But he looked. God, he looked. He'd walk through the house like a ghost with a secret. He'd offer to help with groceries, fix the garden hose, install a new bookshelf in my office. And every time our hands brushed, every time our shoulders bumped, I felt like the universe was testing me, daring me to see how far I'd fall before I shattered. And all the while, David planned a weekend trip. A surprise. Just the two of us, he said one morning, kissing my temple as he brewed coffee. "I think we need it." My stomach flipped, but I smiled. Of course we needed it. We needed so much more than a trip. We needed salvation. I agreed without thinking. That night I told Ryan. His jaw clenched just once, but he nodded. "You should go," he said. "You need it." And I believed, for one foolish second, that that meant he was letting go. But he wasn't, and neither was I. The trip was simple, a cabin by the lake, just like the one we'd visited before we got married. David lit a fire. He brought wine. He tried. God help him, he tried. He pulled out old photos, laughed at how skinny his beard had been, joked about my obsession with classic novels. I played along. I smiled. I even kissed him. But every time I closed my eyes I saw Ryan. Not his face. His look. That devastating look of someone who sees you fully, even in your ugliest truths, and still wants you. I went to bed early that night. David stayed up reading. I lay under the blankets, hands clenched, jaw tight, trying to will myself back to a version of me that didn't destroy people. But the thing about fire, once it's inside you, it doesn't go out. It waits. The next morning, David got a call. He stepped outside to take it, pacing by the edge of the lake, frowning. I watched from the window, sipping coffee, my nerves like taut strings inside my chest. When he came back, his face was unreadable. "That was Martin," he said. Martin was one of his closest friends. I nodded, pretending calm. "He says he saw you at a bookstore last week. With someone." My heart stopped. I had gone to the bookstore. Ryan had shown up. I told him not to come in, but he had. We'd stood too close. We'd argued quietly. I thought no one had noticed. "Who were you with?" David asked, voice soft, like a man balancing on the edge of denial. I told the truth, but not all of it. "Ryan," I said. "He dropped by. We talked. That's all." David stared at me for a long time. "You didn't tell me." I shrugged, trying to look casual. It didn't feel important. That was the first crack. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just nodded and said, "Okay." But from that moment on, the air between us changed. He started asking more questions, not about Ryan, about me. He asked where I went during the day, what I was writing, who I was calling. He never said the word affair. He didn't have to. He began to look through my things, emails, notes, texts. He never admitted it, but I saw the way my phone shifted slightly on the counter, how my journals were placed at odd angles, like someone had opened them but tried to be careful. He bought flowers randomly, made dinner reservations, started kissing me more longer, like a man trying to reclaim something slipping from his grasp. And I let him, not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Then came the night it broke. We were at a restaurant, candlelight, jazz in the background. I wore a green dress David once said made me look like a woman in a movie. He raised his glass and said, "To second chances." I smiled hollow. And then, as if God himself had pressed play on a cursed film reel, Ryan walked in, with a girl, brunette, laughing, holding his arm. I froze. David followed my gaze, saw him, smiled. He didn't tell me he had a date. And then he looked at me, not at Ryan, at me, and something clicked, something dark. Later in the car, David didn't say a word, not until we got home, not until the door closed. Then he asked, "How long?" I played dumb. "How long what?" He laughed sharp bitter. "Don't insult me. Just tell me, how long has there been something between you and my son?" I couldn't breathe. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. He didn't wait for an answer. He stormed into the guest house. I ran after him. Ryan was there alone now. David slammed the door open, rage like I'd never seen in his eyes. "What the hell are you doing with my wife?" he shouted. Ryan stood, hands up. "Nothing. I swear nothing happened." David turned to me. "Tell me he's lying." And I couldn't. I tried. God, I tried. But I couldn't lie to his face anymore. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "It was a kiss. Just a kiss. Nothing else." David laughed again. "Just a kiss? With my son?" Then he punched the wall. Blood on his knuckles. Silence in the room. He didn't say another word. Just walked past us. Out the door. Into the night. I collapsed on the couch. Ryan sat beside me. Neither of us touched. Neither of us spoke. Because we both knew the lie was gone. And the truth, it had just started destroying everything in its path. The days after the truth came out were thick with silence. The kind that suffocates. The kind that creeps under your doorframe and wraps itself around your lungs while you sleep. David didn't yell again. He didn't call me names. He didn't even ask more questions. But the quiet between us was loud enough to echo through the walls. He moved into the guest room without a word. He stopped making coffee in the mornings. He stopped leaving post-it notes on the fridge reminding me to buy milk. The man I'd married, the one who used to call me his calm, became a shadow in the same house. And yet somehow, that silence hurt more than any scream ever could. I used to think hate would destroy love, but now I understood. Indifference does it faster. Ryan didn't come home for 3 days. He texted once, "I'm okay. Don't worry." That was it. No apology, no explanation, nothing. I sat on the kitchen floor the night after David punched the wall, staring at the dried blood on the white paint, trying to remember who I was before I let everything fall apart. I thought of the first time David held my hand, the time he bought me the old typewriter for my writing room, the morning he read my first short story and cried. And I thought of Ryan, his voice when he whispered, "You matter to me," the way he looked at me like I was whole, not some woman with scars on her soul. I was trapped between two worlds I had broken, and the worst part was, I knew I couldn't fix either. On the 4th day, Ryan came back. He didn't knock. He just walked into the kitchen where I was chopping vegetables and said, "He won't talk to me." I didn't turn around. What did you expect? He sat at the table. I don't know, maybe to yell, to punch me, something. I looked at him then. He looked older, tired. Guilt had aged him in less than a week. "What we did, I started, wasn't nothing," he finished. And that broke me all over again. Because he was right. It wasn't just a kiss. It was years of loneliness condensed into one electric moment. It was unmet needs. It was forbidden hunger. It was love in the wrong packaging. I sank into the chair across from him. "We destroyed him," I whispered. Ryan looked at me with eyes that had stopped trying to pretend. "You think I don't know that?" I covered my face. "I don't even know who I am anymore." And then, for the first time since it all began, Ryan reached across the table, not with lust, not with romance, but with something raw and quiet, and held my hand. His touch wasn't electric this time. It was grief. "I was in love with you," he said. I didn't ask if he still was, because the answer wouldn't change anything. That night, David finally spoke to me. He sat on the edge of our bed, our old bed, and said, "Do you love him?" And I told the truth. "I don't know." He nodded slowly. "But you loved me once." "I still do," I whispered. "In some way, but not enough," he replied. "Not enough to protect him. Not enough to stop. Not enough to choose him over the heat I found in his son's eyes." The next morning, David asked Ryan to meet meet him at the park. I wasn't invited. I waited at home, pacing the floor, imagining every version of that conversation. Would there be fists? Would there be forgiveness? Would they hate each other forever? When Ryan came home, his face was unreadable. I rushed to him. What happened? He dropped his bag by the door, sat on the couch. He asked me if I was in love with you. And what did you say? Ryan didn't blink. I said yes. The world tilted. He said he never wanted to see me again. I sat next to him. What happens now? Ryan looked at me for a long time. You have to choose. The words landed like ice water down my spine. Choose. As if there was a choice. As if I could look at the ruins I'd caused and still walk away with one of them. As if love alone could clean this mess. He stood. I can't be around him while this is hanging over us. I need space. And I think you do too. I followed him outside. The sun was too bright. The birds too loud. It felt wrong. Like the world should be grieving with us. Ryan, I called as he reached the driveway. He turned, and I asked the question I'd been too afraid to ask since the beginning. If you had to choose between him and me, would you choose me? He looked at me like I was a tragedy. I already did. And then he got in his car and drove away. And just like that, both of them were gone. David moved out a week later. No long goodbye, just a folded letter on the bed, and the ring I'd placed on his finger 3 years earlier. The letter said, "You were the first person who ever made me feel like I could be loved without earning it. I will never stop loving that version of us. But I can't share my son with you. I can't compete with him. I shouldn't have to. Goodbye." I cried until I couldn't feel my face, until the tears dried into something uglier, something permanent. I broke them both, tore through the spine of our story, and rewrote the ending in ash. And the worst part, I still didn't know which one of them I missed more. In the weeks after they both left, the house felt like a mausoleum, silent, still, echoing with ghosts of laughter and arguments and footsteps that would never return. The guest house stayed locked. David's closet was empty, the bathroom drawer missing his razors, the hallway void of the cologne that used to trail him like a scent of comfort. Ryan's books, left haphazardly on the shelf, gathered dust. My bed became a battleground. Every night I slept on the far edge, afraid to touch the pillows where love and betrayal used to lay side by side. At first, I told myself I deserved the silence. I welcomed the punishment, but as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into nearly 2 months, I realized something far more terrifying than guilt had settled in: nothingness. And I don't mean the poetic kind. I mean the real kind. The kind where you sit on the floor in your kitchen eating toast because a plate feels like too much effort. The kind where you let laundry pile up, not out of laziness, but because the act of folding clothes feels pointless in a life where no one notices anymore. And yet, strangely, in that void, I began to hear myself again. Not the wife, not the forbidden woman. Me, the girl who used to write poems in the backs of notebooks. The young woman who once wanted to move to Paris just to drink coffee and watch strangers pass. The version of me that had dreams before they were buried under expectations, grief, and the exhausting weight of being good. I started journaling again, not the curated, self-forgiving entries I'd written during the affair, but brutal, soul-shattering confessions. And in one of those entries, I wrote something that changed everything. Before I fell for Ryan, before I even met David, I was already broken. I just didn't know it had a name. And that's when it began, the unraveling. The truth no one knew. Not David, not Ryan, not even me. See, people think affairs start with a kiss, or a look, or a moment of weakness. But mine didn't. Mine started 5 years earlier, in a hospital room, staring at a sonogram with no heartbeat. It was my 3rd miscarriage. The first 2 I'd kept quiet, chalked them up to bad timing, stress, fate. But the 3rd broke me. I named him, silently, never told anyone, not even my fiancé at the time, who walked out 2 weeks later with a casual, "You've changed." Of course I had. A piece of me had died, and no one noticed. I didn't tell David when I met him. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want him to see the hollow behind my eyes and think he could fix it. I told myself I was whole again. I smiled. I cooked. I laughed at his jokes. But deep down, I was still the woman who stared at a blank ultrasound screen and blamed herself for not being enough. Not strong enough, not woman enough, not worthy. And then came Ryan, 22, reckless, beautiful, and full of life. He looked at me with that same electricity I imagined my son would have had if he'd lived long enough to smile at me. He saw the pieces of me that had gone untouched for years, not just physically but spiritually. It wasn't about lust, it was about recognition. He reminded me of something I'd buried. I was still alive. And when he touched me that night in the kitchen, it wasn't just my body that responded, it was that broken mother, the one who had never gotten to say goodbye. So when people ask, why him? Why your stepson? Why burn your marriage down for something so doomed? I want to tell them, because it wasn't about love. It was about grief. Grief wears many masks. Sometimes it looks like numbness. Sometimes it looks like silence. And sometimes it looks like kissing someone who should be off limits, just to feel something again. In month 3 of the silence, I went to therapy. I didn't go because I wanted healing. I went because I was afraid I might not come back from the emptiness. The therapist, Maria, mid-50s, sharp eyes, softer voice, asked me one question on our first session. What would you say to the girl who lost her baby? And I broke, right there on the couch. Ugly shaking sobs. Not for Ryan, not for David, but for her. The girl who never got to hold her son, who never told a soul, who carried that loss into every smile and every kiss, and every lie that followed. Maria helped me write her a letter. Not Ryan, not David, but her. The me that never got to grieve. And in that letter I wrote, you didn't fail. You didn't deserve the silence. You didn't need to be saved. You just needed to be seen. That letter changed me, because for the first time, I realized that everything I did, all the destruction, was born from a wound no one ever bothered to look at. Not even me. I started rebuilding then. Not my marriage. Not the affair. Me. I bought new bedsheets, painted the guest house, sold David's old piano, not out of anger, out of release, out of choosing space over ghosts, out of needing something new. I didn't hear from Ryan for 3 months, and when he did call, he didn't say hello. He said, I've been seeing someone, and I smiled. Genuinely, that's good, I said. He paused. She's kind, but she's not you. I nodded. She shouldn't be. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. We both understood. He wasn't mine to keep, and I wasn't his redemption. We were just two broken people who collided at the worst possible moment, each mistaking the other for healing. And David, he never called, never came back. But one day I sent him a letter, not to win him back, not to explain, just to say thank you for loving me when I was drowning, for trying, for walking away instead of destroying me. He didn't respond, and that was okay, because sometimes closure isn't a door slamming shut. Sometimes it's the sound of your own footsteps. Finally, walking away from the fire you started, not in shame, but in growth. Not to forget, but to forgive. I never expected to see his name carved in stone. Not this soon, not like this. David died 5 years after everything fell apart. Quietly, suddenly, in the same kind of silence he carried with him that last year we shared a house. Heart attack, they said. Quick, painless, merciful. But the moment I read the obituary, his full name, the list of surviving family members, the words beloved father and collector of rare books, I felt like the ground had cracked beneath me and swallowed a chapter I'd never get to rewrite. I hadn't spoken to him in years. Not even once. Not after I sent the letter. Not after Ryan moved away. Not even after I rebuilt my life. But grief has a funny way of sneaking back into your ribs like a breath you didn't know you were holding. I stared at the screen for over an hour, reading the sentence memorial will be held privately on repeat. That was just like him, private to the end, still trying to control the narrative, still trying to protect himself from the chaos I represented. But I didn't go for closure. I didn't go to be seen. I didn't go to be forgiven. I went because I owed him something. Not an apology, not an explanation. The truth. The whole ugly, beautiful, broken truth. I waited 2 weeks after the funeral. I didn't want to run into anyone, least of all Ryan. I wasn't sure if he had gone. Part of me hoped he hadn't. Part of me knew he had. When I finally visited the cemetery, it was raining. Of course it was. The same kind of rain that had fallen the night Ryan kissed me. Cold, relentless, honest. I brought no flowers, just a letter, folded neatly in the pocket of my coat, like something sacred. His headstone was simple, elegant, understated, just like him. David Elijah Harper, 1967 to 2029. Still waters run deep. I laughed when I saw the inscription. Bittersweet, fitting, haunting, because oh, how deep he had run, how much he had swallowed, how many unspoken words now lay beneath that stone, never to be dug up. I knelt slowly, knees sinking into wet grass, and placed the letter at the base of the stone. Then I read it aloud, not for him, for me, for every part of me that had been too cowardly to speak while he was alive, for every version of us that deserved a voice, even if no one would ever hear it but the sky. David, I know you didn't want me at your funeral. I know if you could have written the guest list, my name would have been the first to cross out. hurt. And I don't blame you. I'm not here to beg for forgiveness. I'm not even here to say I'm sorry, because I've already said that, in every way a person can. I'm here to tell you what you never got to hear. The things I was too ashamed to say. You were a good man, the best I've known. You loved me gently when I didn't know how to be held. You never tried to fix me. You never asked me to be anything but myself. And I repaid that kindness with betrayal. Not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't love me. I was broken before you ever met me, and I was too afraid to show you the cracks. So I hid them, with smiles, with wine, with a kiss I should never have allowed. I know what you think of me. I think of me that way too sometimes. But I also know this. I loved you in the only way I knew how. Imperfectly, desperately, humanly. I hope you found peace. I hope you found light. I hope you found someone on the other side who doesn't need to be explained to. I hope you don't remember me for what I did, but for the woman you once said was the calm in your chaos. I never stopped being her. I just stopped knowing how to hold on. Goodbye, David. I love you. Still. Always. In spite of everything. My voice cracked on the last word. It didn't echo. It didn't feel cinematic. It just was. Raw. Unearned. Final. I left the letter there, weighed down by a stone from my coat pocket, and walked away without looking back. I never visited again, and I never heard from Ryan again either. The last time I saw him was 2 years after the funeral, by accident, at a coffee shop in another city, both of us older, softer, unspoken apologies tucked into our eyes. He had a woman with him. She was laughing, holding his hand. He saw me. I saw him. We nodded. Nothing more, nothing less. And that was enough. Because some people aren't meant to stay. They're meant to split your life in half, force you to face your demons, then disappear like the ghosts they are. Years later, I published a book, not a novel, a memoir. I didn't use names, but I told the truth. And on the dedication page I wrote, for the man who saw me whole, for the boy who saw me broken, and for the woman who finally learned to see herself. It became a bestseller, not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. Because pain, when told honestly, becomes medicine for someone else. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm no longer ashamed of who I became. Because sometimes healing looks like destruction first. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come from the people you hurt, but from the version of yourself that finally says, you did the best you could, even when it wasn't good enough. And sometimes love dies, but the lesson stays.